Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I've run the Songwriters on Process website, where you can find more than 200 conversations with songwriters about the creative process. I'm not here to talk about tour stories, band drama, how a band got its name, or favorite foods. My goal is to treat songwriters as writers, plain and simple. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers. And today's interview is with the band Joseph. Joseph are a trio, three sisters, made up of Natalie Shepman and also Megan and Allison Klosner. They are twins, but all three are sisters. And this is a first for me. I've interviewed sisters before. I interviewed Allie and AJ a few months ago, and I've interviewed all three members of a band before, and that was the Lone Bellow, but never three sisters all in one band. Their new album comes out April 28th. It is called The Sun. It's fantastic. And I enjoyed this. It's always interesting to listen to songwriters in the same band, much less sisters, listen to themselves talk about their process. And I've done with those other groups I mentioned, they each learn something about each other that they didn't know. We talked individually about their process and also collectively how they create. And so it was, again, I enjoyed hearing about how they take their collective things, their collective rituals, and make them one, make them whole when they record. We talked about not just reading habits, of course, but the voice memos on the phone, whether they like pen and paper or computer, how well they write under deadline. And again, just kind of our own little idiosyncrasies about our process. And this was a lot of fun. They were in 3 different locations. So this was over Zoom with 4 different cameras, but I think we all enjoyed talking about our rituals and what we do. So anyway, I enjoyed this. This is great. They are a lot of fun. Just as an aside, I hope this comes through, but there was a lot of laughter. They are just a really fun group of people to talk to. So we really enjoyed this. And anyway, that is it. I hope you enjoy this interview with Joseph. Again, their album comes out April 28th. It is called The Sun. And here it is. All right, well, let's get started. So I guess, Megan, we'll start with you. And we'll go around, but how important is it for you to create in some fashion, whether it's writing or anything else every day? I mean, I tell the story only because when I heard Bruce Springsteen interviewed on Howard Stern a few months ago, Bruce Springsteen said he doesn't write every day because sometimes he has nothing to say. And I was like, wow, that he would say that. He's like, yeah, sometimes I don't write. And I thought that was surprising. So is that important to you to create every day, whether it's writing or anything in some fashion?
Yeah, I think I'm very, very creatively bent in that way. But like right now, for instance, I'm very interested in cooking. And that is like kind of my creative expression right now, especially being home in this moment. I'm like the last moments that I can cook my own meals before I go again. So, yeah, I think there's, like you're saying, there's so many different ways to scratch that itch. And I'm trying to think. That's probably my most recent thing.
Allie, how about you? Yeah, go ahead. Whoever. Yeah.
I just want to jump in and say with Megan, like, she's been putting a lot of effort and thought into like our merch situation right now. And like the visual aspects of like how this is going to be shown in physical representation. And so I've really appreciated that. And I feel like you've put a lot, like, you're like, what about this idea? What if we made candles? What if the art was like this? And so
I think that's a good point, is like combining. I forgot about that. I've been thinking a lot about like how to make the songs into like a physical form, kind of. And that's been really fun.
So how does that? Well, actually, Allie, let me ask you this next. I mean, how is it important to create every day, or when do you feel like not like forcing it can be a detriment if you don't feel like it's happening on that day?
Well, so I'll just say right up front, I am not much of a writer as a person. been very much like a learned form of art for me. And so for me, like, I really enjoy when we're in the writing process. I really like doing writing songs when we're in the middle of it, but it does not come naturally to me on my own time. I'm like so much more of a like hands-on creator, or like a I love talking. So I'm like I think like that's one thing I love about the writing process is like when we kind of go into a session together, how it's like, okay, what's something somebody's feeling today, and just getting to like start forming the idea by like expressing what it is that you're feeling. That part's like really exciting to me, to like be like sharing an idea and see if it like sparks anything in someone else to like, to turn itself into a song. But in regards to creating every day, I think I'm also someone that like I said, I love creating with my hands. So I'm also like, I really love cooking and fermenting foods. Honestly, fermenting is like something to me that feels like such an art form, and I'm obsessed with it. And anytime I come home from tour, that's like the first thing that I do is I like try and go to the grocery store and like get stuff to make sauerkraut or kimchi or something. But
That's the first. I've never heard fermenting in an interview before. I have to say, in my 12 years, it's a word I've never ever heard uttered in any fashion. So I love that. That's great.
It's awesome. It's
yeah.
awesome.
So, Natalie, how about you?
Yeah, I've been interested in songwriting for a long time, and I think I definitely, so I read The War of Art, in whatever year that would have been, like 2011. And that whole idea of just sit down and get your idea. And I tried to be like that. And the idea of just like more ideas will give you more opportunities to have, a good one. And I've tried to work like that before, but ultimately, other than our like pre-planned writing sessions that we go into with other writers, which I really love that experience, because even if I'm not feeling inspired or like I have anything to say or whatever, going into that room and just making something regardless is really a thrill. And I like that like pressure in those spaces. But me personally, I'm more in the camp of just like when something hits me, like, oh my God, I have to chase this thing. And a lot of times that'll be like going to see other music or listening to music. Or the other day where I was just riding in the car, and I was just like sitting there and in the car with like not great posture. And I just had this whole moment of just like, I like, when you get like a kernel and you're like, oh, this is just like such a rich feeling. And if I just like took some time with this feeling that's just hitting me in this moment of just like this white hot clarity, I would have so much to say about it. So I just wrote down the one phrase that came to mind, which was, and why shouldn't you? And it was just like, I know what I mean by that. And I'm going to come back to that later. But it's just like these things will just kind of come, and I try to be ready for that when it happens.
So do you ever think about where you are in those spaces? Like when I have those ideas too, I think it's important to remember, where I was, whether it's physically or emotionally, so I can return to that. Is that, do you ever think about, where you were and think maybe, that, I guess it's a confidence thing, isn't it? If it's happened there before, maybe it'll happen there again. So
interesting.
Yeah. Is that important?
I try to write down in my little note or whatever, just like every little piece that contributed to it. So I'll be like, okay, driving, and this song was on, and I was sitting like this or whatever, to kind of like return to that, that thing. Or if it's a voice memo of like a little melody or something, I'll try to be like, in the title of the voice memo, some of the things. And I don't always return to it, but then sometimes I do, and it's really rewarding.
So for any of you, I guess, maybe Megan, is there, when you're not creating and it hasn't happened, is there anxiety, or is there a sense of, maybe for a few, if you're in a rut, you can look at it as anxious, or, okay, I'm not writing, but the ideas are, I'm taking in things, and so it's okay. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, for sure. I feel like I'm more on the anxious scale of things. Cause I think this is so many of our greatest faults of like having a really good idea and be like, oh my God, I need to write that down, but I am going to totally remember it. And then you never do. You never do. So I feel like I do that often. And then I'm like, oh my God, I should be making something right now. That's definitely more me but I will say sometimes I definitely feel like, especially after we will have just or before or after a big writing session, I feel like it is so important to just receive things, around you. And I just think letting yourself come in and out of that flow is really good.
So the voice memos, because Natalie, you mentioned it, and there's some things I'm fascinated by when it comes to songwriting, the process of songwriters. Speaking of anxiety, I get very anxious when they tell me they have hundreds of voice memos with no organization whatsoever. And I think there's no titles and then I just imagine frantically scrolling and saying, where was that one idea? Until one of them said to me, well, actually, it's good because that forces me to go through all of them. And as I go through all of them, I might find the nugget in there that I would have normally passed by. So do all of you, maybe Allie, what's that phone like if you have those voice memos in there? Is there any sense of organization?
That is something I've thought about a lot because early on in our career, I would do a lot of that voice memoing because specifically, I think the girls and I will come up with a lot of melodies sometimes when we're doing our sound checks. And so because I think singing into a microphone, you just feel like you can do way more than when you're just singing in a dry room, So for a long time, I would record things and not label them, and that drove me insane. So I actually that is something I'm very on top of, and if I end up not putting one in there, I almost am I just I hate it. So I try and label all mine.
So
you're
label
better
by
than us.
well, how do they label by emotion or idea or what?
Oh, well, it depends. I'll probably just be sound check, Natalie, great idea, or cool melody, Megan, or something, or Nana talking to Papa about this or something. I voice memo my grandparents a lot when they don't know.
Voice memo them talking or the things that they say?
I voice memo them talking because I think their stories are so interesting. Maybe that's illegal. I don't know.
No. Well,
illegal. To not tell somebody you're recording them. I don't know.
I think with family members, I don't know. Maybe that's okay. But I don't know. Do either of you, the other two, is there any sense of organization or no?
No.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
Megan's no.
No. I am guilty of that horrible thing of not naming any of them.
I started doing a thing where I will go back and it'll be new recording 342 and I'll listen and I did it recently where I went through all of it and I named it all, and then things that I thought were things I wanted to return to, I put the same emoji on. So I did the little 3 stars twinkle on the things that I wanted to come back to. So if I just search in my voice memos with that emoji, then all of those ideas come up.
Brilliant.
That's great.
See, I love it. See, we learned something about each other in that situation. You didn't know she was doing that. So I interviewed, my last interview was with Shayna Cleveland, and she talked about, she has an infant, and she talked about how all the time in the world, I think her quote was, it was really interesting, all the time in the world is too much pressure. And we talked about this in the context of deadlines and how having a child makes her, nap time is the only time she can write, but she finds that she gets more done because she has to. And we have 4 kids, and I know that feeling where, you can have 12 hours, but when you're not under pressure, you don't create. But if someone says to you, you have an hour to get it done, you do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe Megan, we'll start with you. Do you write well under pressure.
Yeah. Yes. And I think the biggest example of that is just when we go into writing sessions together, like with the three of us or with other people, because it's like, there is the pressure to be like, okay, we have to have a song by the end of this. And I think it takes out a lot of the like second guessing yourself. I think you have to be really vulnerable and just be like, oh, here's an idea and that's bad, or oh, I don't know, whatever. But like, it's like the pressure of, okay, somebody has to say something and we're going to have a song by the end of this. Like, I think really, really like produces amazing stuff.
And I would even say too, it's that idea of just getting a first draft down. Cause like when I'm writing by myself, which I imagine I think it would be really hard to write prose by yourself. That sounds really daunting to me, but just when I'm by myself, I'll be editing as I go to the point where I'll just like have a block and I'll be like, well, it's not, this first verse isn't good enough. And then I never get to the chorus. Whereas like when you're in a group, you kind of have to make these little compromises of like, maybe that's not as good of a lyric as it could be, but you leave it and it can be a placeholder just to get you to the next place that you then come back to and tweak. We do that all the time.
So you do edit you edit as you go. So do you, so I want to talk about this because that's very different from prose writers. So when like literally line by line, like you won't, so if a line isn't good, you're not going to move on to the next line until that line is perfect.
That's a little bit how I am with when I'm by myself. Like I can get in my head with that and just be like, nope, that's not it. And it can stop me. And that's what I really like about the group writing dynamic when we go in with co-writers, because I won't necessarily, because maybe even one of them suggested, someone you don't know that well might have said something. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, that's phoning it in a little, or that's not quite as thoughtful as I want it to be, or quite as, the core of the thing, but we'll just move on. And then once we have the full thing, then we come back, and that's that. It's always better to have a full thing that you can then come back to and pull apart and make better. So I like that about the co-writing process versus alone.
Yeah, because at least with prose writing, when I was a professor, I told my students that if you revise as you write, you crush your momentum as a thinker, because you don't see the connection between the ideas because you're so busy on one idea. For people who revise as they write, it takes them 10 minutes to write a paragraph that takes me 30 seconds to read. And so they don't see the connections there because they're so focused on one sentence and not how it's connected to the previous one. So that's, and the other thing I was going to say was again, I'm different than you as far as what I write, but I will create as far as deadlines, like a false deadline, and a false deadline isn't, let me write for an hour if there's no reason to stop. But what I'll do is I will, like if I have if I have a phone call at 12, I won't start writing until 11. Now, what I'm writing has nothing to do with the phone call, but it's still a hard stop. I have to stop. And I know that because I go to New York for work all the time for business, and it's like a 2-hour and 30-minute train ride. I'll get more done in that train ride than if I sat here, because I know that I have to put my laptop away. So I'm curious to, Allie, do you write well under pressure too, or do you feel like can be inhibiting to the process with that pressure?
Well, I think like early on, because like I said, I'm not like really a natural writer, and I think early on the pressure felt really intimidating, because I already felt like incapable of doing it. But over the pandemic, we started doing co-writes over Zoom, and that was a different type of pressure because you have no like feeling in the room vibes that you normally get when you're entering, like a home space or something with each other and whoever else. And what it felt like was like, you're just like isolated in this tiny little box, up in the corner. And it feels way more pressure than when you're in a room with people. And that honestly ended up being really, really helpful for me, because it made me feel like, okay, I have to have more confidence, like throwing my ideas out, no matter how dumb they are, or I literally will be sitting in this weird Zoom box by myself for like hours on end and be like, cool. Like I didn't, I wasn't able to add anything to this. So I think that pressure for me ended up being way more helpful, like this sort of like isolated pressure versus like a time frame on it, which was really interesting. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, it does. I've just don't hear people say that Zoom meetings are productive very often. Like that's certainly, but it's interesting. You found that to be more that there was more pressure than if you were sitting in a room, right?
Yeah, it was weird because I think when we're all sitting in a room, it's easy to just sort of, because I like to talk and stuff, I'll like interject all around the writing process and feel like I was a part of the experience, or maybe share my feelings or my stories, but maybe I don't have as many ideas with the writing process. And so I think before, when we were in rooms with each other, with people, I felt more a part of the process, even if I wasn't really giving much. But in the Zoom thing, it just, something about being in your own little island box really was like, I have to give my ideas and I have to be a part of this, or else I just feel like I'm like wasting my time or wasting their time or something. So it was very interesting.
When did you I just don't hear that very often. So when did that, I love the recognition that we have. Like when we know something works, I feel like, oh, now that I know this works, I should go back to it. So, right. I mean, but when did you realize that? When did you was there a moment you said, gosh, I'm getting a lot more done in these Zoom meetings than in person? Like, was there a moment you actually recognized that?
I think there was a moment where I recognized I have to do something more than I'm doing, which was like after our very first Zoom co-write that we had to do, because it was very awkward and I could say a lot about it, but I was like, this is so weird. And but was there a moment? I am honestly not sure. The one that comes to mind is when we were writing with these writers, Taylor Parks and Wynn Bennett and this girl, Laura, which was our biggest co-write we've ever done with. And Natalie mentioned this the other day, and I was remembering the whole process, but normally on the Zoom writes, what we would do is just do what we're doing now, where we would just like talk it out just as if you were in a room. But what they ended up doing on that session was they played the sort of musical idea, and then we all muted our voices, and so nobody was talking over the musical idea, and then we would all type into the little box, which was so cool because you could just say a stupid idea, and then like if nobody liked it, the text just kept moving and it just would disappear. And then if somebody liked it, then they would be like, oh, that's awesome, and kind of pull it down into the main part of the chat. And that gave me a lot of confidence, I think, right off the bat, just to be like, okay, I can just say anything I want here. And I'm not like taking up the airspace in the room, to be like, I have an idea, everybody be quiet kind of thing. But you just like throw out an idea and it just disappears in the box if it's gone. So that was definitely a moment where I think I really started, like throwing my ideas out there, no matter how dumb they were, for the first time.
So the big question, Natalie, I'll start with you. Shifting gears, when it comes to the writing, are you a pen and paper person or a computer person when it comes to lyrics?
Pen and paper, 100%.
You sounded insulted. I even asked that question. I mean,
no,
so
not insulted.
Now, okay, two-part question. First of all, why? And then the second thing is, I could do a whole website dedicated to the brand of pen, color of ink, and type of paper that songwriters use, because it has to be, and it has to be only a certain type. So I can tell you've got an answer waiting to go. So let's hear it.
Well, I don't know what it's called, but I know what the pen is. I just, to me, it's when you're bringing something that's so ineffable and invisible and you're trying to call it into like existence, it feels so much more like a solid tactile thing, to write it down. And then I really like the process of feeling what it feels like to like, form the letters. And then I love the process of looking at it. And then if something's not right, like crossing it out. And then I can see that record of like what it was. And then I'll go, what about this word? And I'll write that up there. And then that might still not be right. And then I'll visually be able to see like the process that it was. And I love that moment too in a session for me personally, when like I've annotated and crossed out and done all of these little like arrows, like actually this is the pre-chorus or whatever. And then I'll bring it from like that state into like what feels like this very soothing experience once we have decided like the final form of the song and the final lyric, to then write out in such a neat and tidy, lovely way, like what it actually is. And then to see those two things side by side is just like very calming to my system.
So is there a color of ink, or does that matter?
It's all, I mean, like I would write with blue, certainly not red. But like definitely black ink red is the best. You love red?
Oh I love red. I think it's so pleasing.
You do write in red a lot.
It's funny, Al.
Okay, so a couple of follow-ups. One is there's a lot of research, actually. It's funny because with pen and paper, there's a lot of research that shows that students retain information better note-taking with pen and paper versus a computer.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, so it's not, and it's a different part of the brain, that's impacted by that. So, but I do hear, so it sounds like that sheet is then there's no linear, like there's kind of stuff all over the place.
All
on
over.
That initial draft.
All over.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm curious about, because some songwriters tell me that they to I guess make it to not place so much importance on it, they will deliberately write on whatever is around them. So the back of like utility bills, or like to not make it, because if you make it less precious, it puts less pressure on you.
Oh, that's cool.
Wow.
I don't think I've ever thought about it that specifically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not precious about the paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've done that because I'm just kind of messy. But
so you write with whatever is available, or how precious is that process to you?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I've done both the computer and the paper thing. And the computer thing, I was like, someone was like, you should just try it because it will help just stream of consciousness. And that has been really cool for me at different points, because I feel like, I'm maybe thinking of it a little bit less, what I'm saying, and just writing. So that's been cool. But yeah, I am pretty, I would like to say I am getting to be a tidier person, but it has not been something people know me as. And so I think I am definitely just like whatever is in front of me.
So, but you said the stream of consciousness is with a computer. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's funny, because there was something, there used to be something called free writing, which people still do. Free writing is this idea that, you like write for 5 minutes, but you don't stop writing. And so literally, I mean, pen never lifts paper. So it was an exercise in school. And so if you can't think of anything to write, you're actually writing. I can't think of anything to write.
Yeah.
And then, but I can see that with a pen, because you can, like, there's the continual writing. But with computers, that's interesting that you find that to be easier with a keyboard rather than pen and paper.
Yeah, because I think that when I'm writing, I would say sometimes when I'm writing, like I'm thinking about what my handwriting's looking like and like stuff like that. Because it's a little bit hard to read my handwriting. So sometimes it's just a little bit easier to be like, oh, I can actually see the sentences that I wrote.
Yeah.
But I'm not strictly computer, but it has been something that's helped at different points.
Yeah. Allie, how about you?
I kind of am a twofold. If I'm going to be writing, I love writing in sketchbooks because I don't like having lines. And that feels really nice. And when I'm in like sessions with people, I way prefer that. Just because like that, you can kind of what you were saying, how you can be like, I don't know what to write. I feel like I do that in my when I'm doing the sketch stuff. I'm like, I have no ideas, and I'm writing that down. But if I'm on my own, really love my note app in my phone. I wish there was a way to lock my note app down so no one else had access to it, because that's where I do most of my
You
brain
can.
You can?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
make
you
your
can
notes.
lock notes. You can put a
so many
password
locked
protection.
Notes.
On the whole app or on like individual?
No, individual.
Okay. Individual notes. Yeah.
All right. Well, I need to do that because that's like that's my brain dump. That's my journal.
See, this is why I love these interviews. See, right away, look at how much we've learned already.
Fun.
Learn something new.
You can lock down the notes app. I mean, I was not expecting that conversation, but it happened. I mean,
so fun.
Yeah, so that I do hear that sometimes that songwriters love the nonlinear, like the sketchbook. I've heard that. Like, who told me this? Daniel Lanois, the producer. He told me he does all of his lyrics on 11x22 art paper for that reason. He said there's thought bubbles and arrows, and there's lyrics here and lyrics there, and there's no linear thought at all to this because he's not a linear thinker. So why try to force that linear process on the page? So that idea of sketchbooks can be really effective.
Yeah. It's also nice to I think in my mind, maybe this is like some weird linear thing coming into the sketch zone, but I always like challenging myself to see if I can write in straight lines on the blank sheets of paper.
And wait, who's the red ink person? Is that you? I forgot who that was.
Allie.
Oh, it's Allie. Okay. So it's got to be red then.
Well, so I love writing. Yeah, I love red. I have a maroon and red pens. I think it's just so nice to look at. The red and the white together looks so nice.
So I have a lot of, this is for me too, but I think I had this quote from Agatha Christie, the novelist. She said, the best time to plan a book is when you're doing the dishes. And what I like about that is the ideas that come to us during mundane activities. Excuse me. We already mentioned chopping vegetables, but I've heard things like gardening, vacuuming, cleaning. We get ideas when we're doing activities that require no thought. And so those ideas can come from the subconscious when we're not focusing on that thing that we're doing. So I'd love to hear from all of you in that sense. Like, have ideas come to you? I mean, they're crazy. I've heard folding clothes, doing laundry, like whatever the activity is, the less brain power it takes. That's when the ideas tend to come to the forefront. So, Natalie, we'll start with you. I mean, do you get ideas during those activities?
It's so funny that as you're saying all of this, to be honest, like what happens in my brain when I am like alone is something I've been working really hard on, because it can be an unfriendly place. Like I will fixate on like things that I wish I would have done differently or said differently. And like my mind is trying to like perfect and grind down like different things that I might have, that I might be embarrassed. Like it can be not a good place. And so I actually find like more ideas, like, because when I'm doing those things, a lot of times I'll try to listen to music or, listen to a podcast or something to sort of get my brain working on something else. So like, I find that my most inspired times are when I'm seeing or experiencing something that lifts me out of my day to day, like whether that is a show or a movie or on a road trip, looking at the scenery, like things that sort of like take me out of what can feel like very rut, spaces in my thought processes are the things that help me go, oh, I have this bird's eye view, and here's this, here's this thought about my life or whatever that could be, or this line or whatever. So I think I'm opposite of that.
Yeah. Megan, how about you?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say driving. I feel like driving is probably the time that because I love driving without listening to anything. It's just like a really good time to be thinking for me. And so I feel like, and I would say that's also why sometimes I am like, I will forget a really good idea or what I think is a good idea because I'm driving and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't pick up my phone or something. But I feel like that is a time when I have my own therapy and work out my own things and have really good ideas. But
so it's not that you're noticing things like billboards or something. It's kind of the blank state that you're in when you're right, almost that highway hypnosis, I think is what they call it. Drivers.
Totally.
Like
Ernest Hemingway famously said he could never write about Paris when he was in Paris. He always needed distance. And so I think that's something we can talk about. Can you write about something? Do you need distance to be able to write about something, or is it more effective right afterwards? And I guess, Natalie, we'll start with you. You know, do you need that distance, or do you need that immediacy of it to be able to write about something?
I love that. I mean, I think my immediate answer is both, because I feel like you get something different. Like I was riding on the back of someone's motorcycle recently, and I thought in that I just had, to me, like the best stuff comes from when you have that just like, you know, it's just like this kernel of feeling. And I'm like, oh, I'm experiencing freedom right now in a way that is both literal and metaphorical. And this is going to be rich soil for me when I can, and like lines were coming to me. And so in that moment, I was like, oh, I can see the whole picture of what this song is going to be. Like, I know where I'm going to head with the song. But then it's been interesting because then I wrote that song, like, you know, a couple of weeks later, but in the moment I had a lot of clarity about what it was going to be. So I kind of want to say both, because I do think that the distance allows you to like step back from the painting a little bit, but also there can be those moments where the clarity is there, like as it's happening.
So on the motorcycle, then, did you do anything? Did you even afterwards write anything down, or you literally let it sit for a couple of weeks?
Oh, good question. Did I have any lines? It's like, yeah, no, it simmered. Yeah. As I'm thinking about it, no. And then it was one of those songs too, that just kind of like rushed out when it came. It was just like, oh yeah, this whole thing is like, here it is.
I also can't imagine the worst place to have a song come to you on the back of a motorcycle. I mean,
right, you can't do anything about it.
Right. How do you even, right. You can't let go of anything.
No.
Wow. Megan, how about you? How important is distance, or does immediacy work for you?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is, I think that during the pandemic, I think at first we were like, oh my God, there's so much to say, kind of. And then when we went to go write, it was like, literally, what do you say? You know, it was like, we're so in the middle of it that we were like, we tried writing songs and they all were so bad. Like, it was just, we were like, wow, I think we probably do need a little space from this. So I would say probably both as well, like Natalie said, because we've written songs about things that I've been very in the middle of, and it's been interesting because it will be like on our last album, we have a couple songs that were about the relationship that I was in, that like it was things that I actually couldn't say in the moment, and somehow we were able to write it in the middle of it without me saying it. That's like,
well, we had a co-writer. We had a co-writer who was like, oh, are you kind of saying this? And then you would be like, you were kind of like, I don't want to say that. And then Allie and I were like, yes, that's what it is. So like as sisters, you hadn't verbalized it, but Ethan helped draw it out.
Exactly. I think that's also a strength of being like a group too, is like, if I were to sit down and write that song in that moment, probably I would not have been able to go there with myself. Right. Like, I would have needed some distance from that. But because I was in a group setting with Natalie and Allie, and then, like, for instance, this guy, Ethan, it almost gives you that distance because they have distance on it, you know? And they helped me write about something that was pretty immediate. So
that's cool.
So I have this quote here. This is related to what we're talking about. This is from the novelist E.L. Doctorow. And I love this quote when it comes to writing or songwriting. Writing is like driving at night. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way.
That is so
amazing?
Good.
I'm going to repeat that just so we can let that sink in. Writing is like driving at night. You can only see as far as the headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way.
I love that.
Yeah, isn't that
So
amazing? That's one of my
interesting.
favorite writing quotes.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. So, I mean, collectively as a group, how often does that happen where you have that vision at the end, but it's how do we get there kind of thing? Or is the process for you collectively, hey, let's start this and see where it takes us? Does that make sense?
Do you mean like it's not like, oh, we're going into this to write this exact story, or?
Yeah, I guess that's a variation of how often do you sit down and say, I've got a song I want to write. This is what I want to say versus, oh, I've got
Oh,
this kernel. Let's see where it takes us kind of thing. Like how, I think that's maybe a better way of phrasing that, if that makes sense.
yeah, I think that like what will happen is we'll each, especially because for our band, so much of the writing happens in a like a boxed amount of time. Like when we've done the album cycle and we've been touring and we've been outputting so much, during that time, I think all three of us will be trying to like have little things and like written down and ideas, and maybe some full songs will come into fruition at those times. But really the bulk of the writing for our projects happens when it's like, all right, it's writing time. And then we have these dedicated sessions that are scheduled and everything. And so I would say that once we get to that point, hopefully we each have like written down enough little like kernels of ideas of things to bring to those sessions. And we'll kind of pre-decide between the three of us, like, ooh, what should we, like this person, we like that they do this kind of thing, so we should bring this idea to that. Or like, we'll have maybe some days none of us will have any kernel of anything, and we'll literally just arrive at the room, and then we won't even say like, what are we thinking about today? We'll just start having a conversation and then start writing a song about whatever the conversation is. So I think it's like a combination of those things where it's like, sometimes it's just kind of like, what are you bringing into the room today? Like what's on your mind? What's going on? And then we'll like run with that. And sometimes it's predetermined, like, let's chase this idea that, that one of us has.
Yeah. So there's a lot of mixing and matching then, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You take this from, kind
For
of,
sure.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple more questions. One is I'm fascinated by the rituals of writers, the flat out rituals of the process. I think it's important for me to know what time of day I get my best writing done. For example, I write in this chair, but I revise in that chair behind me. So I just think that that's important to have distance between the writing and the revision process. And that's that works for me. And I don't know how I found that out, but it works. And I've always stuck with it. There's certain types of day when I'm most effective, certain things I have to have with me. So Allie, we'll start with you, I guess. How important is a ritual at all? Do you need one? Is that important? Maybe special room, anything like that when you create?
Well, I don't know. I feel like for us, we like change everything up so much that I don't have a ton of rituals. I think like this is maybe like part of that question and also a little bit of the last one too, but this is something that I think, I don't know if you would call this a ritual, but it's like a thing that we've been doing like recently that I have found to be really powerful. And I'd be curious if this is just like a group thing, but we do a lot of times, one of us will be bringing like a story to the table, and Natalie will sit there on her phone with her notes app and just let the other person just talk and talk and talk. And then she'll just like pull sentences from what they're saying. And then, so I don't know that that's like a ritual, but that's been a thing that to me has felt like really important and really fun to see like what kind of comes out of that. So yeah, because we switch up our space so much when we're writing and everything. But maybe the ritual is always having the notes app available. I don't know. But
yeah, right. I mean, you just described one to me. I mean, that is absolutely a ritual. Yeah, Megan, how about you? Is that when you're, when you're creating by yourself, or any of those things important?
Yeah, it's funny because like I'm not sure I have any of those specific things either. I feel like It's so rare that I'm like in one place for long periods of time. Like I've switched homes a lot even too. So I'm like, I don't even own a chair. I'm like 2 chairs. That's amazing.
I feel bad. I mean, geez.
No. We have chairs. We have chairs. I have chairs. It's just my parents' chairs. But no, I'm like, we just are we're traveling a lot. So I think like probably my ritual would just be like the journal that I own at the time is like the thing that I continue to return to. So, yeah, I always make sure I have the journal and like 25 pens. So I feel like that would probably be my ritual, is just keeping those things close.
Is there a certain type of journal that you like? Back to that. Is there a certain type of notebook?
Yeah, okay, so I've definitely been like a sketchbook person at times. I'll go through phases, but I'm really like the journal with the spiral.
Yeah.
So you can flip it on both sides.
Nice.
I hate it when it's like there's a bend. I have a crossword book that obviously bends, and I never do any of the ones on the left side because it's so annoying, the feeling of it. So I'm definitely a spiral person.
So speaking of the chairs, so I interviewed this a couple years ago, Britt Daniel from Spoon. And so he told me, and I love this, I've always remembered this. He said that when he first started to write, I mean, years ago, he had no furniture. So he wrote on the floor, and now he still writes on the floor. Even though he has a couch, he still writes on the floor because it worked for him. And it always reminds, and it feels like that's where, they say the mojo is. But yeah, I mean, so he can afford a couch, but he prefers to still sit on the floor.
That's awesome.
I know. I think that's so interesting that we return to those things. And when, because we know they're successful. So Natalie, any kind of quirks in that process, things that you have to have with you, or time of day or anything like that?
Oh, definitely not time of day. It'll be
coffee.
Like when I've got something going. Oh yeah. I mean, I definitely have to have coffee. That's without question. I would just say like my voice memos are such a companion. Like that's, to me, I like, sometimes I started doing this thing recently where I would realize like I would be trying to figure something out and I wouldn't want to hit the record button yet because I would be like, it's not ready yet. And then I realized like I just did something like organically that was so good that now I don't remember. So now I've begun like, no matter what's going on, just hit record. And before you even have like the first thought, so whether that's a ritual or not, it's just like a little thing I make myself do before I even get started. Just hit record, because anything that's about to happen could be good.
I'm always interested in other, not to reference Hemingway again, but he said that all artists should go to art galleries to get inspired. So I'm curious what other, whether it's art galleries or movies or books, if you'd like to read, we'll start with that. Maybe Megan. Or do you like to read? Who do you like to read, or any artistic endeavors? Not necessarily influencing you as a songwriter, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a big reader. I love all types of books, but I'm a big fantasy reader, and I think that like I've like to myself pondered like it'd be really a fun exercise to write a set of songs based on like some of my favorite books, because I'm like there's so much content that's already there, and if I just pretended like it wasn't, this person named Feyre in a book, but like pretended like it was like my life or something. I'm like, I feel like that would be such a fun exercise, and I haven't done it yet, but I've thought about it. And so I think reading definitely is a big one for me personally.
Are you so I am not an author person. My thing, I read every day, but my whole thing is when I finish a book, I don't want to read something else by that author. I want to get other voices in my head.
Interesting.
Yeah. So are you kind of an author person, like devour everything by that person, or are you more of a genre person?
I would, well, definitely both, but I would say I love finding an author that I love. Cause when I feel like, oh, I can trust you, like, cause one thing in the fantasy world is there's just I would say there's any reading you're like, I didn't like that book, and I hate that I spent like so much time listening to that or reading it. I mean, and so like so recently, like there's one author that's like very new that I'm like, oh, okay, I like her, but I feel like she's so new, and I'm interested to see where she continues to grow because I feel like she's going to be amazing. So she's interesting. And then there's one author who I really love. I love, and I'm like, okay, I know you're gonna take me somewhere that I want to go, and I'm super interested now to like read more of your book. So I would say, yeah, I'm an author girl.
Natalie, okay, we'll end with you. So reading habits, things like that.
Reading habits. The girls are better readers than me for sure, but I love poetry too, not to an extent that like my poet friends know all the new writers and everything, but I'm just always so moved by a really, like Maggie Smith is someone new that I really like. And Nahira Waheed, I think is how you say her name. Anyway, that like just different to me, the ability to so like pointedly and what's what I'm looking for, succinctly say something so potent and so right, is like really stunning to me about that particular art form. And I mean, of course, like Billy Collins, or like, of course, like Sharon Olds, or like, and then of course Rilke, like just different, like I love that. I will, that's my go-to when I go into a bookstore, is just like picking something up. And Tony Hoagland, I like him.
Yeah, awesome. You're the second person. I'm a huge Sharon Olds fan. I've seen her give readings.
Gosh, I love her.
Yeah, when she would give readings with Galway Cannell, who passed away maybe 10 years ago, and they'd read together. And Sharon Olds she teaches at NYU, I think. She still teaches.
That's my understanding.
She is amazing.
She stuns me, and she makes me laugh, and love it.
And that's it for the latest episode of Songwriters on Process. Don't forget, you can find all of my interviews with over 200 songwriters on my Songwriters on Process website at songwritersonprocess.com, going all the way back to 2010. You can read them, watch them, or listen to them. So until next time, thanks for listening.